Hey everyone. Now, before jumping into the actual topic, let's just first of all try to understand why something like animations or micro interactions is even important. I just did a simple Google search for the same, and this is the first thing that came up. Micro interactions are events which have one main task, single purpose, and they're found across audio devices and within apps. Now, how do you define this task? How do you define this single purpose? While I was looking for an answer for that, I came across this Medium post by Vamsi, and this is how he puts it. Micro interactions, their purpose is to delight the user, to create a moment that is engaging enough, welcoming, and dare we say it, and the most important aspect, human. Now, I'm not sure how many of you still remember seeing this dial up internet connection dialogue back in those days. These were those days with Windows XP and everything. We never had those fiber. That back then we didn't have those, fiber optic cables and everything. But there was one other important thing back in those days, right? Which was that earlier on, browsers weren't really designed for animations of then scrolling. They were much rather designed to be, mere document viewers where people can share their research papers and they can just share information. The first sort of animation that we had was in the form of GIFs, which were introduced back in 1987. And earlier on, to be honest, it was mostly used by companies to more like animate or I would say rotate their logos. You might have seen those text screensavers in Windows 7. It was kind of like that. And now we use it for, of course, sharing memes and, having fun conversations. But back when browsers were still at war, there weren't really many cross-platform standards to point to. The web was young and experimentation was rife, and developers wanted to be able to create interactive websites and games, whatever the cost may be. And that's how Flash came into the picture in 1996. And if you're someone from early 2000s, you may remember visiting websites like Miniclip, which offered Flash-based games in the web browser. I played a lot of them. Now, while Flash was a great technology, it went against one core fundamental principle of the web, which was to be open and accessible. And to cut a long story short, Flash support has been deprecated across all major browsers since 2020 actually. So rest in peace. However, the first sort of actual language that we had for animation, I would say design was in sort of SML. It's an acronym for Synchronized Multimedia Integration Language. I know it sounds a mouthful, but this was introduced back in 1999 and it was used to animate SVGs. And this was created by the Standards Committee. Now, then for the next few years, things remained pretty stagnant until 2009. In 2009, there was a twinkling in Steve Jobs' eye, and the Safari team who was working on, the Safari version for iOS, they were like, dude, we need to make the web look cool. We need to add animations and we can't use Flash. They couldn't use Flash because of memory constraints or something back in those days. So they came up with some specs for CSS animations and transitions. But since there was no standards process in, Apple being Apple, they just laid it out. They just threw it up in the ocean of the internet. And that's why there are not a lot of similarities between SML and CSS animations and transitions. However, on the other side of things, back with the folks in Internet Explorer team, they were trying to cope up with these three different standards: SML, CSS animations, and transitions. And there was a state of urgency and a need for standardization. Hence, fast forward to a couple of years, they came up with this concept of Web Animations API, which comprises of SML, CSS animations, and transitions under one single umbrella. The Web Animation API consists of two key things: timing and animation, which is basically the when and the what. For example, imagine that you have this board or an image of a board and you want to add a fade in animation. So you may define it something like this, right? That at 0 seconds, the opacity should be 2%, 0.2 or 20%. And let's say at 8 seconds, the opacity can be 100% or 1. So you just gave these two frames, right? Your browser is smart enough to calculate all of these other instances in between. So the first one and the last one that we defined, these are known as keyframes. Now I can't wait to jump into the editor and show you some really cool stuff. Yes, so here I am in my code pen, and this is a very simple one. I just made it last night. I just have a CSS drawing of a cat, and with all the HTML, CSS basic stuff, and I want to add an animation to it. I want to ensure that maybe my cat can blink its eyelids. So let's try that. Let's see how we can go around that. First of all, what we'll do is, like I'll show you. So I have just created this eyelid class, which basically points to the left eyelid and the right eyelid, both of them. So what we'll do is I'll basically animate this one. So I'll use the keyframes identifier, and then I'll write the name, animation name. Let's call it blink. And now this is the part where you define those keyframes. Remember the board example that we talked about? Start, end, and everything. So we'll say that at 0%, I want the height to be 0%. And let's say at 50%, I want the height to be 100%, which is like basically the eyelid should, follow it. Should cover it properly. And at 100%, we should revert back to the original state, which is height should go back to 0%. Now we have defined an animation over here. This is how we define a typical animation, but you have to link it up, right? We have to hook it up with this particular eyelid class. So to do that, we have an animation property, the CSS property, where it takes the animation name, and then you can define the duration as well. I'll say, let's say 2 seconds. And there's another thing as well, which is like iterative count. I can set it to iteration count. I can set it to infinite, and so keep on happening. Otherwise, by default, I think it's set to once. And now you can see our cat is actually blinking. So it worked. So what we just wrote right now, these were CSS animations, right? Since practically we were just writing everything in that CSS block only. However, if you notice one thing closely, over here as well, we always had a defined start and an end state, and then everything in between. Because of this reason, these are also known as state animations. However, what if we want to make our cat interactive? I'll click on the cat and then only it will blink its eyes. Or in other words, what if we want to create stateless animations? Can you think of something? Write it in the chat. Now, I'll give you a hint. Since the same name suggests event, right? The first intuition that comes to your mind is event listeners, JavaScript. But yeah, the animation that we wrote, it was in CSS, right? So can we somehow do a combination of CSS and JS animations? Maybe like write CSS animations, but invoke them using JavaScript? Is it even possible? Exactly, that is exactly what the Web Animations API is all about. Now let's see how it works. Now here I am back in CodePen. I have a similar looking CodePen, but this time it's a bit different. I've removed all the CSS part, and now we'll try to recreate that same animation which we just wrote in CSS using the Web Animations API now. So if you notice one thing, I just have, just to get started with it, I just have these two variables lined up in JavaScript. I'm just doing a document.querySelector for the face, and then querySelector all for the eyelid, the left one and the right one. So how we start is, first of all, let's define our keyframes. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll just declare an array over here, an array of objects. So remember how we had at 0%, the height should be 0%, and then perhaps at 50%, the height should be 100%. And then we at 100%, we should restore it back to 0%. So now we have defined our keyframes. Now here's the cool part. Let's try to do this thing. Since eyelids will give us two elements, right? Since it's an array, document.querySelector all. We'll just first of all try to call the first one. So this I'm getting the left eyelid, I suppose, and we'll call the animate API. We'll pass these keyframes, and then it accepts options. In this options, we can pass something like duration. I'm providing 2000 here. 2000 could be 2000 milliseconds. Now, yeah, this is weird. Our cat is winking at us. Looks strong, right? So in order to fix that, what we can do is we can just do eyelid start for each. We can iterate through this, and then for each eyelid not animate. I hope I am spelling that correctly. and then we'll pass the keyframes again, and then duration as 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. Now everything goes wrong, well, cat should blink, which it is doing. Now, but we want to add an event listener, right? So how we can do it, that is we can just easily do this paste or add event listener, click, and this will accept a callback. So in that callback, I can just write this code. So the next time I click on my cat's face, it should blink its eyes. Simple enough, right? Now this is a transcript of what we just wrote, right? And if you look closely, we are basically just calling this animate API for each of these elements, right? And this API accepts two parameters, keyframes and options like duration, iterations, and etc. However, under the hood, what this API is actually doing, it's creating this new animation constructor and then passing down all those keyframes and other various options that we mentioned before. Now, this is where things get interesting because this animation constructor opens up a bunch of possibilities for us. We can leverage this to play with different animation states. You can pause, play, reverse, finish, and cancel any animation at any particular instance of time. In fact, this is a code from the Web Animations API spec itself. It says that time may be shifted backwards and forwards, scaled, reversed, paused, and repeated. Now, I know, you might be asking, hey, Ishan, that's cool, but what's the big deal? It's just an API, right? Now, in order to answer that, I have to ask how many of you are actually Marvel fans over here? Raise your hands in the chat or type your favorite Marvel movie or your favorite character. Well, I am one. So, and recently, I was watching this one particular show, Moon Knight. And this is when one of my designer friends, she reached out to me and she asked me, dude, can't we create this particular, can't we build something like this in the web? And as a CSS guy and a person who just loves the web and has been working with it for 8 years, I was like, yeah, sure, anything is possible. Although I wasn't too sure how to do it. And that's when Web Animations API came to the rescue. Now, here's this is the page that I built. And the moment I click on console, basically the entire world spins. It's a cool concept. Now, there's another particular page which I'm a big fan of, which is this Apple's Mac OS page. This was Mac OS Big Sur, I guess. This was 2 or 3 years ago. I still remember the first time when I experienced this, I was like, whoa, how did they do this? Now, how can we create something like this? How can we create animations like these? Because if you notice closely what was happening over here, all of these animations were, not just happening on the screen. It was not just a video or something getting played. These were all scroll triggered, synchronized with the scroll bar itself. Like whenever I'm scrolling, I'm controlling these animations. So let's try to break it down. Now, if we want to create something like this, first of all, you need a MacBook, an image of a MacBook. And if you try to observe what's actually happening is that you have this window coming in from the top left corner, or basically an image of a window. And then this another one is fading in and zooming out from bottom right. And then we have this notifications panel from top right. And then this comes in from bottom left. What's interesting is that these are not, all of this is not one single animation. The interesting thing to note over here is that these are all individual animations. But when you put all of these together, it produces this immersive effect or illusion. And what those folks at Apple were doing were that basically they were just playing this sequence of animations at the same time. Now, of course, we can achieve this with the Web Animations API as well, what we just saw. But things might start looking a bit messier in code as we progress, and at the same time, maintaining and managing the state and synchronizing all these animations together might become a bit overwhelming. That is where we need a conductor. Not the physics one, which can conduct electrons, but a person who leads an orchestra. And that is where libraries like GreenSock and Motion One come into the picture. Now, I have played a lot with GreenSock. I haven't played around with Motion One to that extent. But one thing that both of them have in common is this timeline object. Now, this timeline constructor, it's again a very interesting one. This accepts an array or a sequence of animations. And remember when I told you that the animation constructor was super cool? This is why. Because that animation constructor actually accepts two things. One is effect, which was the keyframes effect, what we were passing earlier. And second thing is timeline. And by default, all of your browsers, they already have this document or timeline. It tells you the amount of time you have spent on that particular web page. And by default, whenever we create any CSS animations or any animation using the web animations API, this is the timeline which it gets hooked into. And yeah, so what these folks in Greens are, what they have is they have something called scroll trigger, this particular plugin. So how do you synchronize with the scroll bar, right? So what they do is, in order to do that, they just replace this particular timeline with scroll trigger timeline. And that's how you achieve that immersive effect. Now, sometimes in the products, you might want to go for rather plug and play option instead of writing everything from scratch. And GIFs might not be the best choice because of a couple of limitations. First of all, their high file size. Secondly, their resolution, quality. The major reason is like these are raster based, and you need an image of every single frame. That is the main thing which enlarges the size. That is where Lottie files can come into the picture. Actually, these are pure SVG based animations, which means firstly they are scalable and they don't take up a lot of size, and secondly they are way more performant than GIFs. So we started way back with GIFs from 1987 to Flash to Smil, CSS animations and transitions, and then we looked at the Web Animations API and the libraries like GSAP and Motion and the Lottie files as well. And although there's so much more to cover, but let's just take a moment to appreciate how far we have come, right? And maybe let's just take a look at where we are headed next. What are some of the new things that are coming up in the web animations world? So last year, Chrome developers they announced this experimental API which they were working with, called the Page Transitions API. As the name suggests, it's for transitioning or navigating between different pages. Now, it can be enabled behind a hidden flag in Chrome 104 or later, but once it gets rolled out, adding transitions between different pages, would be as easy as just adding this particular code snippet in your navigate or history.push if you are someone from the React world. You can still do it, by the way. Like you can, people usually create this using libraries like Framer Motion, but there's a lot of boilerplate and everything involved. Of course, there are a lot more things which are possible with web animations, and we haven't even touched 3GS and WebGL animations. Or you can think of these as 3D animations. Here is one of my favorite examples. Yes, so this is a page I came across, and I'm guessing it's for a music artist or someone. However, there's one particular effect I saw over here, which was these are all album art covers in the form of cassettes and CDs. What the cool part is that you can actually explore all of these just like this, and you can even click on one of these. And the moment you do, a song starts playing in the background, which I'm not playing right now because otherwise there will be copyright issues on this channel, maybe. But yeah, it's a pretty cool one, and it's just crazy how far we have come, and what are the kind of things we that are possible with 3GS. But yeah, perhaps we can talk about it some other day. Also, another important thing which we didn't cover today and something we should account for whenever we are crafting any animations for the web is accessibility. You should ensure that all of your potential users, including people with disabilities, have a decent user experience and are easily able to, access your information. Because that is the core fundamental of web. That's the core principle. It was created in order to, just share information. But again, since we are short on time, maybe let's just take this up on some other day. And with that, we have reached the end. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope you all like the talk. And if you have any feedback or just want to have a fun chat, feel free to connect with me on these handles, or I'll be available for the Q&A as well. Thanks so much. Have a great day.